As you probably know, as a church, we have been going through the book of Proverbs, mostly in sermons, but then for a couple family nights, we did them as Bible studies, and I may have touched on them midweek in a devotional through a video like this. And today, that's what we're going to kind of start with, but then branch off and look at a bunch of other verses actually. I was reading through Proverbs chapter 27, preparing for a sermon, or preparing, dividing it up among a few sermons actually. And I decided that instead of preaching a sermon on this particular verse, I'll just include it in this video. See, in Proverbs chapter 27, it lists a bunch of different types of relationships that people can have. And in there, it says this verse that many of us are familiar with: iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. And then it talks about some other relationships there. But it's this idea, and I hinted at it in last week's video, about building up each other in our faith, of encouraging one another, of helping each other grow, and helping each other grow closer to God and further away from sinful living and from the ways of the world. And that's what I want to talk about today, is what does that act look like? What does the Bible say about that? And what can we do to help sharpen our brother and sister in Christ, and how can we in turn allow them to guide us and sharpen us as well. There is another verse in here that reflects on that. I'm actually going to save that one for a sermon that we'll be doing in the next bit. Our first text I want to look at actually comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 4, verses 9 to 12, it reads, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." So here we're almost just talking about the logical side of it, but it's easier to do things with another person. If you fall, to have someone to be able to help pull you out of the ditch, to help get you back up on your feet. If you fall and you injure yourself, someone to help take care of your wound or care for you. And this goes in the physical sense, but it goes in the spiritual sense, that when we go through our life and we try to avoid sinful living, and we try to put away this past self that we once held to, it's very beneficial to have a brother or a sister in Christ who comes alongside you and who's able to lift you up and encourage you and help you and prevail against those attacks that come against you when people try, or the world tries, or the enemy comes and tries to bring you back into a place of worldly living. It's very beneficial to have someone who can come alongside you and pull you out of that. Next, we're going to jump all the way up to Romans. Romans actually says quite a bit about this, but today we're going to look at Romans chapter 14, verse 19. "So then, let us pursue what makes for peace and mutual upbuilding." Now, this whole section here is talking about people. Chapter 14 is talking about people who are relatively new to the faith. Oh, I'm stepping on the cable. People who are relatively new to the faith versus those who are seasoned in the faith. And it's kind of talking about, you know, helping build each other up. And that there's going to be things, for example, eating pork versus not eating pork. And so at this time, the Jewish people, some of them still in the church, would have had an issue with eating pork. And others would have seen the freedom in Christ that, hey, bacon's back on the menu. And that they can have that, and they're finding that. And it's saying, regardless of these different opinions you can have, honor your convictions, but in all things that you do what makes peace, and build each other up for a mutual benefit. And it's all about this sense of unity that we should have, even though we might have different convictions. And so to the person who feels they shouldn't eat meat, don't eat meat. To the person who does, then do. But don't judge one another. Don't condemn one another. And be willing to give up your meat to help the faith of someone else there. He talks about that at another point there too. But that's the question, is how much are we willing to give in order to build up our church community, to build up each other and encourage their faith? I'd hope you'd be willing to give a lot. We've talked before about how the church is not just a social gathering. We talked about that last week. That it's not some club. It's not just a social circle that you come together with, or a community center, or just a group of people who seem to have a common opinion on something. It's a lot more than that. It's family. It's a everlasting, eternal family, and we should see each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, I have two brothers, and there's not much I wouldn't do to try to help them and to be there for them. In a physical sense, they're my brothers. And I would say, as a Christian, in a much more real sense, those people who are in the church that are Christian, they are a family that goes beyond biology. To me, it's more than that. And that's hard for some people to get to, but I'd encourage you to have that point of view that these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. I'm going to do what is to their benefit. I'm going to build them up. I'm going to encourage them. And I'm willing to make sacrifices to see their faith grow. It's another text we can look at. We can look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16. Now, we looked at this in the past video in a bigger section of text. But here it says, from whom the body joined and held together. This is talking about Christ. From whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. Now, there's two ways that we build up the church. We build up the church through evangelism, through spreading the gospel, and that would build the church in the sense of quantity, the amount of people that come into the church. But there's also a building up of the church in quality, that we would be well-seasoned, developed Christians who help build each other up, who help each other have a better understanding of the ways of God, who help push people towards the culture of God, and that we would be an example of the ways of God to the world around us. And that is a way that we can build people up. I would, it's kind of hard to say that, but I think there's a sense of quality that is often overlooked when we look at the health of a church. Someone thinks of a church with X amount of people, and if it's a very large number, they think that's wonderful. But if they're all very basic in their understanding, and there's no desire of growth, and they're not building each other up, and they're just satisfied with basic level theology and basic level relationship with God, then there's something I find so disappointing about that. Because we as the church, like we talked about this last week, are to, as a group, be building each other up and helping each other grow closer to God and be focused on Him. And at an individual level as well, we should be helping out and seeing what can I do to benefit you in your faith? What can I do for that? And so when the church is operating properly, we will be building each other up in love. The verse in Proverbs 27 that we didn't talk about talked about how kisses from an enemy are undesirable, but the wounds from a friend are desirable. That's not the exact wording, but it's close. And the idea there is that when we have a friend who's true, who's genuine, and in our context, who is a person of faith, who believes what we believe, then when the wound we receive from them through correction, we actually enjoy, because it brings us to a place of being closer, that through that wound we're actually becoming more holistic in the sense of we're being reunited with the way we were intended to be in relation with God and in following His ways. And so we're to build each other up in love. Let's also look in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 to 25. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So here we're called to consider, how can I help you grow your faith. This is a language of an active thinking of what can I do to benefit your faith? What habits can I put in my life that would be of benefit to you? What commitments can I make that would be of benefit to you? What conversations can we have? What can we do together? What activities can we incorporate into our living that would benefit our brothers and sisters in their faith? And then not to neglect the meeting together. Now, I've heard many people say before that they'd rather go out on a lake or sit in a tree stand. I mean, these are two communities that I'm very involved in. Then they'd rather go into a church because on the lake is where I can talk with God. And to some degree, I actually get that. I understand that. For me, I have a lot of wonderful conversations with God on the lake. But I don't like crowds on the lake. I don't like crowds in the tree stand. The Bible tells us not to neglect the meeting together. There is something so important about us coming together. The Christian faith is an individual belief, but it is a collective body of believers growing together. We are not welcomed into a soul relationship with God. We're welcomed, we are, but it's more than that. We're welcomed into His family. A table for a feast. Not an intimate one-on-one seating, but also this gathering of the many. And that's what we're called to. And so there is a huge emphasis through the Bible. I mean, these are a couple verses, but there's actually quite a few more we could have looked at, where it makes this point of we need to be building each other up. We need to be focused on that. And so my question is, in your conversations, in your interactions with one another, do you just talk about base level things, or do you promote the ways of God to one another? Do you have people in your life who are willing to call you out on the sin of your life and hope and help and pray for you to be more righteous in your living? Do you talk about your prayer life? Do you talk about the Bible and what you're reading and what you're studying? Do you have people you can go to with questions? And are you willing to answer questions and seek out those answers when people come to you? Do you rejoice at the gathering together with your brothers and sisters, or is it a chore? Do you see people in the church as your brothers and sisters? Not in just a sense of a title, but in a legitimate, I love this person, they're my brother, they are my sister, and I care deeply for them. It's one of those bonds, it's a relationship that should be deeper than most other relationships that we will have. Obviously, there's some, parent and child, spouse, those go much deeper, but at the same time, this is an eternal family, and we're to cherish it and encourage one another. I would encourage you in your church, if you're a part of our church, then I would encourage you to make yourself at home, be committed to this group, and allow the church body to build you up and for you to actively build up those in the church. And if you're not a part of this church, then I'd encourage you, those in your social circle that are Christians, allow them to edify you, to build you up, to encourage you, and to also ask you those hard questions of why are you entertaining this in your life? This isn't right. And have that deeper relationship. Iron sharpens iron. We're called to continually be growing in our understanding of God, in our love with one another, and our commitment to being the light to the world. This is a constant thing, and I hope that you can help those around you to just continue to grow, to sharpen one another, that when they fall, you're willing to pick them back up. And when you fall, you're willing to take their hand in love to care for one another. I hope that's helpful to you today. And I hope as you go about this week, you'll look for opportunities for you to build up your brothers and sisters in Christ. It's very important. God bless. Have a good week.